But if you'd like to open your Bibles to Psalm 27, or at least have it marked, then there will be a time we're going to look at that entire psalm today. Last week, I gave to you a message from the Lord about not being afraid of men, and how we have a problem of sometimes fearing what people will do to us, and that fear often controls our behavior and our responses far more than we know it ought to, because we want to be devoted to God, and yet we're afraid of what people will say, we're afraid of what people will do, and we let the fear of circumstances, the fear of what others might say or do really influence our behavior more so than our faith in God. And as I was thinking about what was shared last week, I realized that the message couldn't stop there, because there was far more to it. See, we are influenced by the things that we fear. So much so that very often that is the governing factor within our lives. And very often we are afraid of what people will say and do. We're afraid that we're not going to be accepted, or we're afraid that we're going to offend someone. And so because of that, we do hold back on the message that God gives us, or we hold back on even living out the Christian life, because we're so afraid that the exercise of our faith is going to prove offensive to someone, and they're going to look at us and they're going to get the impression we're trying to impose our faith upon them. And so we kind of go overboard the other way, and we pull back. And instead of being the faithful witnesses that we're called to be, we end up becoming very reluctant and quiet Christians, in a sense, kind of the closet Christian who really believes but kind of stays quiet and stays out of sight. God knows the natural tendency of our lives. That is the reason Jesus founded the church, or at least one of the main reasons. Because he knew that none of us standing by ourselves is going to be very successful. Because the factors in our lives, the problems, the obstacles, the fears are going to overwhelm us if we stand by ourselves. Now, we know that we have the presence of God with us, and I'm not discounting that. Jesus says, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age, or to the end of the world, or the end of the time as you understand it. I will be with you. And that's wonderful. And we know that God's presence is there. But there are times when we need the physical presence of someone else standing beside us to give us the courage to do what we know we ought to do. How many times have you faced situations in your life that you knew the answers? You knew the right thing. You knew what the Word said, and you knew what you ought to be doing, but because you were standing by yourself, you found yourself unable to do what you knew God wanted you to do. But as soon as someone stood beside you, they didn't have to give you advice. They didn't have to say a word. Just the very fact that you knew they were standing there with you, then you could face that problem. You could face whatever it was. God knows that we are not created to stand alone. And so Jesus said, I will form a family of people who will love each other and who will care for each other, and for whom the major characteristic is going to be unity, because they're going to stand side by side as brothers and sisters, supporting each other, so that one who stumbles or one who is overcome will suddenly find strength from the others and be able to stand back up and be able to do what needs to be done, or face whatever needs to be faced. We're told in Genesis that as God created man, he looked around and there was no suitable helpmate for him among all of the creation of the earth. And he said, it is not good that man is alone. He was talking about more than just marriage. He was talking about a reality of our lives. We need companionship. We need people who stand with us in faith, who give us the strength and the encouragement. Sometimes the accountability. As the expression goes, they sometimes hold our feet to the fire, and they won't let us give up. They won't let us give in. They won't let us fall by the wayside. And if necessary, one will grab one arm and one grab the other. And even though we're not standing on our own feet, they'll drag us along until we're strong enough to stand on our own feet. God knew that was a characteristic of us when he created us. And so he created us to be family. He created us to stand together. Jesus sent out his disciples. He didn't send them one by one. He sent them out in twos. Why? One to be praying for the other, one to be strengthening the other, one to be encouraging the other, one to stand there. But as they walked into situations, they did not look around and say, I'm by myself, I am alone. Because when that happens, fear begins to set in. Elijah, the great prophet of God, on Mount Carmel, single-handedly, it seems, with nothing but the power of God on his side, defeats the prophets of the Baal and the Asherah and has them destroyed. Great victory. All the people come over to Elijah's side, it seems. And then within just a matter of hours, Queen Jezebel says, I'm going to do to you like you did to my prophets. Elijah's running for his life and finally gets to the point and he says, what's the use, God? I'm the only one. Only I have been faithful. I'm by myself. And what's the point? Why don't you just take me home to sleep with my fathers? I give up. It's overwhelming. I'm by myself. After God taught him a good object lesson on the mountain, then he said to him, Elijah, you're not by yourself. I have preserved over 7,000 who have not bowed their knee to false gods. You're not by yourself. You just don't know they're out there. But they are. Now be encouraged. You're not alone. There are others who are standing, who are fighting the fight with you. Do not let the fear overwhelm you. Do not let discouragement overtake you. Do not give up. Do not quit. You're not alone. One of the great things that came out of the conference that I experienced this past week as ministers gathered together to pray for each other was the sense we're not alone. Those who believe in the power of the Word of God and stand on the authority of the Word, we're not standing by ourselves. And therefore, the fear of standing alone was dispelled and people were encouraged. God knew that we needed each other. Jesus' great prayer in John 17 was, Father, I pray for them the unity of oneness that you and I have. That is, I am in you and you are in me and we are one with each other, so let them be one with each other. Why unity? One, there's power in unity. We know that. He says over and over, where any two or three are gathered together, he is present. Where any two agree on anything, his power falls. There is a power in unity. But that's not why he said unity was so important. It's part of the reason. Part of the reason was witness to the world, that we could live together in faith and live together in love, and we could be brothers and sisters, and we could live the way God intended. And so it's a witness to the world. But that's not the great strength of unity. The great strength of unity is encouragement. Strength to be able to fight the battles, to be able to overcome. And when one seems to stumble, then there are others there to shield and to protect and to lift, so that they are not destroyed in the process. You see, the enemy wants us to think we are alone. That's one of the reasons he's brought division in the world. If he can divide us, if he can separate us, and we feel that we're alone, then we begin to feel, well, it's useless, it's hopeless. How can I, as one, accomplish anything? And suddenly I feel isolated and I feel alone. And then I begin to feel overwhelmed. Nobody understands me. Nobody cares. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Oh, that's the lie of the enemy. See, he wants to use fear to defeat us. Because fear is his number one weapon. If he can divide us, if he can break apart the unity, if he can isolate us, then he brings in fear. And after a while, being pounded by circumstances, pounded by problems, pounded by anticipations, suddenly the fear begins to take hold. We become apprehensive. We get frightened. I mean, you look at our world today, there's plenty to be, quote, frightened about. It seems. You can't turn on TV without hearing how many people were shot last night in Birmingham or in other cities, or how much violence is going on here, or how many wars being fought there, and all the atrocities and all the dangers, and they're warning you constantly about your car and your home, and people are living in absolute terror today. They're afraid of going out of their homes. They're afraid to go to the local mall to go shopping. Afraid they'll be attacked in the mall itself or out in the parking lot. We live in a state of fear. That fear is produced by the sense that I am by myself facing overwhelming odds, and I am powerless to change it. I am powerless to do anything about it. And out of that comes a sense of helplessness and hopelessness that defeats who I am and defeats me and makes me a victim. And I walk around defeated. I walk around trying to survive. Then how am I to stand as a witness? How can I go into the world and proclaim the message of the gospel? How can I be a light to the nations when I am being whipped and beaten and frightened to draw back into my home or to draw back into within four walls and say, I'm safe and secure here, I'm never going to leave? The enemy knows well that fear destroys witness. Fear destroys us as God's examples to the world. Fear destroys our message because it causes us to withdraw. We literally let it have power over our lives. Now, I'm not talking about what I would refer to as good fear. I want you to understand that. There's different kinds of fear. What I would call good fear is really not really fear at all. It's really more like wisdom. I don't go playing in the middle of a busy street. Not because I am so foolhardy that I think I could just walk out there and everybody's going to dodge me, but God has given me enough sense to know that if I willingly put myself in danger, there could be consequences to that. That's not what we're talking about. God gave us that kind of fear. He gave us adrenaline that the minute we're in a frightening situation, we either are able to run from the situation or stand and fight. And that's what it's there for. He created us that way. I'm not talking about that kind of fear. That kind of fear is a servant to us. It gives us wisdom. It causes us to make wise decisions. It means I just don't go walking up to a fire and sticking my hand in it. I know what's going to happen. I'm not talking about the kind of fear that serves us. I'm talking about the kind of terror that rules us. That's what the enemy uses to destroy. In the 23rd Psalm, we're told in a verse that is so precious to so many, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. That word in Hebrew means to look at something with a sense of awe. Now, awe means a sense of being overwhelmed. When you hold something in awe, you're just amazed. I mean, it seems so big, it seems so huge, it seems so marvelous, it seems so wonderful, depending on the circumstances. Or in this case, sometimes it seems so morbid. But it just seems so powerful, so great, so unconquerable, that you look at something and you say, you have power over me. That's what this word fear means. To look at something and say, you have power over me. The psalmist is talking about evil. And he says, when I look at the evil in life, when I look at the evil around me, when I look at the things that come to try to destroy me, when I look at the work of the enemy coming against me, when I look at the problems in my life, he says, I'm going to say to them, you do not have power over me. Because you see, the minute we say, you have power over me, we give it authority in our lives to rule. When I say to a circumstance, you can overwhelm me and I am powerless in front of you, I have not only given it, acknowledged that it has power over me, I have now said, you are now going to determine my responses. You are now going to govern my life. and I've given it authority. And that's what we do. When we live in fear, we let fear rule in our lives. That's why God speaks of fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord says exactly the same thing. I look at God and I say to Him, you have power over me. And God says, yes, I do. And God says, now let that govern your behavior. Let that now govern your life. Let it rule in your life. But when we look at the work of the enemy, when we look at the obstacles, when we look at the problems, and we look out there and we see these things coming against us, or we look at the opposition, and we say to it, you have power over me. I'm going to live my life in fear. It becomes terror. And that terror is paralyzing. We can't move. Have you ever seen an animal who suddenly finds itself right in the middle of the road with oncoming headlights? They will freeze because they're filled with terror, indecisiveness. They can't decide whether to go forward or go back. And that indecisiveness causes them to stand exactly where they are, right in the path of destruction. And that's what fear does. Fear begins to dominate in our thought processes. Fear begins to rule over us. It becomes the focus of our lives. When nighttime falls, this is all we can think about. All we can think about is the danger that is out there. And suddenly I am paralyzed. I can't move. I can't respond. I can't react. I can't do. Because I am being ruled by the fear that I have allowed to have authority in my life. Because I have said, you have power over me. Again, we go back to the image of the 23rd Psalm. Because you see, as he says, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It can also be translated, I walk through the valley of the deep shadows. It was a frightening place because it was there where the path between two steep hills would become almost like a ravine, and the animals would almost have to line up single file. As they would go through this, often in deep shadows, the animals would lurk in the shadows, and then the mountain lion or the leopard would simply rustle some rocks. And the sheep would hear the rustling. And one of two things would happen. They would either be paralyzed with fear and stand perfectly still, afraid to go further, not knowing what is there, or they would bolt. Either case, they get isolated from the flock. And once they're isolated, then they become easy prey. They can be picked off. You've heard the expression, there's safety in numbers. Well, the way in the animal kingdom, that means if there's 5,000 of you and he's only going to get one, the odds are pretty good in your favor. But he's still going to get one. But when it's one-on-one, then the odds get much worse. And see, the enemy knows that. And so the wild animals would want to frighten the sheep because the shepherd's up there. The flock's stretched out. If I can frighten a lamb or a ewe into bolting and running, or if I can frighten them into freezing and standing still while the others go past, then that person gets isolated. That one gets isolated and becomes easy prey. Very often, the things that we fear the most are not the things that we see. They're the things we anticipate. They're the things that we don't understand, or the things we don't know, or the things that still lie in the future. And our minds begin to work on it. Well, this may happen, and that might happen. And the fear grows in us as we start imagining, to use the modern vernacular, worst case scenario. And we start living worst case scenario to the point where we are afraid to move forward, we're afraid to act, and now we have made ourselves spiritually vulnerable. What was it that gave the sheep the courage not to fear the evil in the 23rd Psalm? Though I will go or walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And he's speaking to God, because you are with me. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. God is with me. He said that's the only thing sometimes that gives me the strength to go on. Sometimes it's the presence when others in the flock look back and they say, wait a minute, he stopped or she stopped. And they go back and they circle around and say, come on, this is the way the shepherd's going. You see, it's the presence of others. It's that encouragement. It's that strength that keeps that fear sometimes from taking hold. But the minute we feel that we're alone, the minute we feel we have to fight the battle by ourselves, then that fear is going to overwhelm us. We are simply not strong enough to fight that battle by ourselves. This fear then takes charge, it rules, it dominates, and very often the thing we fear the most is the thing that comes on us. That's what Job said. Job 3:25, what I feared has come upon me, what I dreaded has happened to me. Or as one translation says, the thing that I feared the most is the very thing that has happened to me. See, fear becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Why? The minute we start letting fear rule in us, we have opened ourselves up to everything. We have opened ourselves up to assault from every direction. And now the battle is engaged, and we are the battlefield. You see, the real issue of fear is not so much the physical response, the physical situation, the physical setting. It's the spiritual setting. It's what's happening spiritually, not physically, that is the real issue. See, what happens in a war, in a battle, when terror strikes the soldiers, when the enemy appears so fierce, some of you may know in history how there were different groups, especially the Britons, who were some of the early ancestors in Great Britain. They would paint themselves blue, and they would have all sorts of their hair out wild and all sorts of wild colors on them. And when they would suddenly appear in mass, their enemies would look at that, and it was like, help! And terror would strike their hearts, and they would begin to run. And guess what's the first thing that happens when terror strikes the heart of a soldier? He drops his shield. What is our shield? It is faith. What's the first thing that drops when fear begins to overtake us? We begin to lose faith. We begin to give up. Yeah, that's why it's a spiritual battle. You know what fear says? Fear says, God is not able. It's up to me. God is not able. That's what fear says. When I turn and I look at a circumstance or I look at an obstacle and I say, you have power over me, I'm saying that God is not able to conquer you, therefore you are stronger. And that's exactly what fear is all about. It is the issue over who is the strongest, who has the power, who is the most able. And when we live in fear, we are saying God is not that one. And that's the proclamation of our lives. Do you remember the story of Jonathan and the armor bearer? Saul had defeated a Philistine group, a small contingent, was feeling really proud, and so the whole Philistine army said, okay, we'll teach you a lesson. And they came on him, and Saul and his soldiers were hiding in the rocks in terror. And Jonathan finally said, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. I mean, after all, aren't we God's army? Then why are we hiding in fear? Who's in charge here anyways? Who is it that has the power anyway? Is it the enemy or is it God? Yielding to fear says the enemy has greater power, not God. So you see, it's an issue of faith. When we finally make the decision, wait a minute, God's in this battle. Wait a minute, the shepherd's with me. Wait a minute, the shepherd's people are standing around me. Wait a minute, the situation is not the way that it appears. God has said something else is true about this situation, and we make a decision that we're going to stand in faith, and we're not going to let the fear rule us. When that happens, we begin to turn the situation completely around. When we make a decision that the fear is not going to rule over us, is not going to govern in our lives, the first thing we're saying is, my God is able. My God is able to handle any circumstance, handle any situation. My God is able to do anything that needs to be done. Abraham is called by God to leave his family and to go into a land that God's going to show him. And everybody talks about the great faith of Abraham. Wonderful man who walks into the land of Pharaoh, and what's his first response? My God can't protect me here in this foreign land, so I better figure out something myself. He trades his wife for security. God intervenes. He gets scolded by the Pharaoh. The issue is not what he was doing, that he was being unfaithful to a covenant with his wife. The issue was, he was saying, my God can't protect me here. And you know, he did the very same thing with Abimelech a short period of time afterward. He said, well, I'm in a foreign land. I don't think God can protect me over here. My God's not able here. He's done it there, but he can't do it here. That's like the children of Israel. God gave us water a while ago, but he's not going to give it to us today. God gave us food yesterday, but what about tomorrow? It's this idea, when I stand in faith, I'm saying God is able. God is able to do more than I could ever imagine. Ephesians 3:20. Now to him, that is to the Lord, to God, who is able to do immeasurably more than all we could ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. Immeasurably more than I could ever imagine. When we start getting that into our spirit, when we start realizing the truth of that, then when the fear raises its ugly head and shuffles the rocks a little bit, trying to frighten us, we laugh. We say, you don't know who's walking with me. Because the one who's walking with me is more powerful than you could ever hope to be. And the one who's walking with me is able to do immeasurably more than I could even imagine. So why should I be afraid of you? Often the enemy and his forces have been described as a shadow warrior who raises up as a big shadow. You've seen these cartoons. The big shadow appears on the wall and it looks ferocious, and you look and it's a little bitty figure standing over here next to the light. But because of the distance, the shadow looks humongous. So that's the way the enemy is. His purpose is to frighten us so that he is given authority, when in reality, the God we walk with is more than able. That's what brings us to Psalm 27. Verse 1. The Lord, that's not just anybody, this is the Lord, is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh, when my enemies and my foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then will I be confident. Why? The Lord is my strength. The Lord is my salvation. The Lord is my light. He is my stronghold. Why should I be afraid? Because I know the Lord, and he is able. The second thing that it's saying, God is not only able, but God is faithful to do. This is the crux of much of our faith struggle. Well, I know God can, but the question is, will he? I know God can get me out of this, but the question is, will he? I know that God can see me through, but the question is, will he see me through? And what is his word? I will never leave you nor forsake you. Is God going to go back on his word? Is God going to say, oh boy, that one's too tough for me. You're going to have to see this one alone. No. God not only is able, God is faithful, and he will do. This is the real question of trust. God will do. He may not do it the way we want him to, but he's not going to let us be destroyed. 3 young men facing a fiery furnace. The king says, bow down to my image. And they said, King, we're not going to do it. And he says, I'm going to throw you in the fire. And they said, our God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't do it the way we think he can, doesn't matter. We're going to be faithful to him because he will see us through. He will see us through. I may pay a price. There may be some pain. There may be discomfort. Things may not work out the way I want, but God is not going to let me face it alone. And He will see me through. And in the end, who I am is going to triumph. I will walk victoriously. I may walk with a few singed feet, but I'll walk victoriously. Because sometimes I have to have my feet put to the fire. But God not only can, but God will. That's what the rest of Psalm 27 is all about. As he talks about seeking the presence of the Lord and living in the house of the Lord. And he says, coming down here in verse 5, for in the day of trouble, He will keep me safe in His dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of His tabernacle and set me high upon a rock. Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At His tabernacle will I sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Not a matter of maybe, not a matter of, well, He can if He wants to. He says God has promised it, and if He's promised it, He will do it. My God will be faithful. The third thing we say when we stand in faith is that He is there when I need Him. Just like the cry of the sheep. Though I go through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm not going to fear evil. Why? Because God is there. He's going to be with me. He is not going to make me walk the path by myself. In Joshua, first chapter, Joshua is told by the Lord, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Now listen to these words. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. That's an encouragement. I not only know that God is able, that God is faithful to do, but He's here to do it now. He's here to do it now. And the fourth thing we're saying is, and He will equip me to face the battle regardless of what it is. He will equip me so that I do not fight the battle empty-handed. Timothy is told God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and love and of sound mind. He's given us love, and it says that perfect love casts out fear. That when you're loving and trusting God, fear just has no place in your life. That doesn't mean you're foolhardy. It means you walk in faith. And you're strong because the Lord God gives you the power to walk. He is able, He is faithful to do, He is present to do, and He will equip you to fight the battle and to face whatever is there. But it requires a faith decision that you are going to let Him be the one you fear and not the enemy, not the problem, not the obstacle. You won't let it control your life. You're going to stand firm and be the strong one. Not because you're such a strong person, but because God is with you, and He will put people with you. And you will stand in unity, in love, in harmony, and you will be able to say to the enemy, regardless of what the obstacle, regardless of what the problem is, you will not overcome me. You may deprive me of some of the things I wanted. You will not overcome me. You will not destroy me. Because I'm with Him. And He is more than able to see me through. I pray that God gives us the courage to make that stance in our lives. Regardless of what we're facing. That the enemy is never given the authority to govern through fear over who we are, over what we are called to do or be.